was in Syria once. I was in southern Turkey. I was in Iraq. I was in, a variety of different areas within the Kurdish territories that are experimenting with direct democracy. And
Can you tell me a little bit about what brought you there, and certainly from the very beginning?
it was less that I found them than that they found me. There's people involved in the Kurdish freedom movement that, it started, or it emerged in the PKK, which is a rather conventional Marxist-Leninist, guerrilla group in its origins. But something about its history took it in this radically new direction. A lot of it was internal processes of women guerrillas sort of asserting themselves and introducing feminism as a big theme. Part of it had to do with the particular intellectual evolution of their leader, Öcalan, who's become this, since his arrest and imprisonment in this like island prison in Turkey, has been reading a lot of Murray Bookchin and a lot of feminist theory, and again, came around to a much more anarchist position. Basically, they decided that rather than demanding a state of their own, they wish to simply make borders irrelevant and dissolve away states entirely. And it's kind of made sense to people in that part of the world. Remember, the Kurds are a population who are divided between Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. The idea of their somehow carving a government out of that seems unlikely, and they also make the rather common point you hear a lot of, actually. People say, well, we come to realize in this part of the world, demanding your own country is basically the same as saying, I demand the right to be tortured by secret policemen speaking my own language. It's not much of a demand. So they've come around to this idea of bottom-up direct democracy and sort of eliminating borders is the best way that they could come up with something like a Kurdistan that would make sense.
So the place is there? Can I even say the place is there? I mean, there is a physical place that you
Kurdistan.
went to.
Oh, I went to Rojava. Rojava is, or Kurdistan, is the Syrian part of Kurdistan. It's a large section of northern Syria along the Turkish border. And about 2 million people there engaged in what I think considered to be one of the great historical experiments. My father fought in the Spanish Civil War, so I kind of grew up in a place where the memories of what happened in Spain in 36, 37, 38, were very vivid. And so one reason I came to be an anarchist is because I always say most people don't think anarchism is a bad idea. They think it's insane, right? I mean, no police, people just start killing each other. Nobody could actually organize things without leaders, and in fact, my father was in Barcelona when it was run on anarchist principles. They just got rid of white collar workers, and sure enough, they discovered these were basically bullshit jobs that they didn't make any difference if they weren't there. So having grown up like that, I understand that it's possible, but there hasn't been an experiment on that scale like what happened in Spain in the Republican-controlled, especially anarchist-controlled areas, since, because everybody's so terrified, and people running things, like, they don't mind if people say, I hate you, I want to overthrow you, nearly so much as they say you guys are ridiculous and unnecessary. That's what they really fear. So the enemies they like are the ones who try to replace them. Marxists basically, the Marxists come, the police will still be there, and probably there'll be more of them, right? Anarchists come, the whole structures will be changed. People will be told they're just completely unnecessary. And so that kind of experiment they're really afraid of. They tend to stamp it out as quickly as possible. So this is the first time, I think, since Spain that you've had a large area of territory under the control of people who are trying to do that, trying to create bottom-up direct democracy without a state.
Where else has that been tried?
Well, I mean, it's tried everywhere in the world for much of human history and worked fine. But under, modern industrial conditions, there have been various attempts. In most revolutionary history, they talk about the Paris Commune, they talk about Kronstadt, they talk about Makhno in Ukraine. There have been attempts to do so, but usually everybody of all sides, including the left-wingers, turn on them and try to suppress it.
Okay, and so what are the basic minimum things that they have to organize in, or the success
Well, they
of
run in
organizing
cities.
Rojava?
It's a real, country of real economy. It's a poor one, and they're under embargo. But there are people driving cars. There's traffic rules. There's workshops and factories producing things. There's farms. There's all the things you have in a normal society. Roads have to be maintained. But essentially, what they have done is created. It's very interesting. I've said, I've described it as a dual power situation, but it's the first time in human history, I think, where you have a dual power situation where the same guy set up both sides. So they have a thing that looks like a government. It's got a parliament. It's got like ministers. They pass legislation, but they also have the bottom-up structures. The bottom-up structures is what they call democratic confederalism. Every neighborhood has an assembly, and every assembly has working groups. You know, there are people who handle health issues and medical issues and security issues, and each one of those groups, each assembly and each working group, also has a women's group. They have to have 40% women, or they don't have a quorum, but they also have an all-women's group that can veto anything they say. So it has to be, everything is gender balanced. All officials, there's two, one male, one female of everything. And also the army's like that. That's why they have all those famous images of the women with weapons. But that's political too. People said very explicitly, they said, well, look, we're anti-capitalist. We've always been anti-capitalist. But, you know, I think they say the lesson of history, we feel, is that you can't get rid of capitalism without getting rid of the state. And you can't get rid of the state without getting rid of patriarchy. Well, how do you get rid of patriarchy? Well, making sure all women have access to automatic weapons is one place to start. You really can't push people around if they're armed. All right, so and they have their women's police forces too. That like, so they have direct democracy, and it goes from these neighborhood councils, and those councils confederate into like regional ones and then municipal ones, and they all send delegates, not representatives, to make decisions together. They have a very elaborate system. But the key is, you know, you have this top-down system, you have a bottom-up structure. Well, what they say is this isn't a state because anybody with a gun is answerable to the bottom-up structures and not the top-down.
I see.
Yeah. So the people on the top can't actually force anybody to do something they don't want to do.
Right.
There's one exception, and that's women's rights. So they have, like, you know, they'll have laws like abolishing child marriage or something like that. And they say some of these villages would probably reinstate it if we let them. But that's off limits. And they do have an enforcement mechanism, but that's an all-women police force that enforces rules specifically relevant to women.
How long have they been going with these?
3 or 4 years now.
And what was the inspiration? Was this the gentleman that you said in the prison? In
Öcalan, yes, Abdullah Öcalan. His picture is everywhere. It's interesting because, generally speaking, they very much shun a cult of personality. Like, in fact, they never have images of anybody who's alive except for him. They have pictures of people who are dead. You know, so there's pictures of martyrs everywhere from the wars. But you know, they'll never show an image of someone who's still around because that would be anti-democratic. You know, make someone out to be a charismatic leader. He's the exception, but that's because he's in prison for the rest of his life. So, you know, he's the leader and everybody accepts him as such. But the thing is, Turkey was going to execute him, but they, you know, they still wanted to get into the EU at that point, so they knew they couldn't do it. And according to law, he could put any testimony relevant to his crime. You know, he had the right to write it all down. So he decided that in order to explain and contextualize the crimes he's accused of, he would have to write 12 different books, including a 3-volume history of the Middle East, and so forth. So this work has been coming out continually and is used as a sort of grounding for debates within the Kurdish movement. And he made all these declarations. We need to, like, get away from like purely class struggle model and understand that the oppression of women is the most primordial and immediate thing we have to deal with. We have to understand that ecology is equally important to exploitation. So they've become this sort of ecological feminist army based on principles of direct democracy.
Are his works available in English?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not all of them, obviously, but there's volumes coming out continually. And, you know, just from an anarchist point of view, to some degree, it is a little creepy. You go there and there are all these pictures of the great leader. And I came to refer to him as Uncle Oj. Like Uncle Joe backwards. But, you know, he's the opposite because he's like the, you know, the authoritarian leader telling everybody to read Anarchism and stop being authoritarian. Okay. And it puts the old-fashioned authoritarians in a terrible bind, right? Because, like, you know, they have to do everything the leader says. The leader's saying, like, you know, think for yourself. They're like, well, okay. You know, yeah. And obviously the young people are very enthusiastic. So, I mean, they're not anarchists, but, like, they embrace a lot of anarchist ideas. They've been reading anarchism. They're anti-state, so, like, what they call themselves really doesn't matter from an anarchist position as long as you're anti-state and anti-capitalism.
How do they protect the territory?
Well,
If they,
they believe in the notion of defense. Well, the thing is, they're the best fighters in
but what's
Syria
the
at this
difference
point.
between state and what they're doing? Because
Well, they
they've got their
say
territory, so surely,
it
I
protects
mean,
society. They say that like the argument they
isn't that
have
a
is,
semantic difference, though?
well, they think not, because what they would say is that a state is a monopoly of legitimate use of coercive force in a territory. They don't have such a monopoly. It's a democratic bottom-up organization. There is no institution that can do that. So they say, well, any institution has to defend itself. Anything in nature has to defend itself. Defense is but it's waging aggressive war, or attacking that. So their army is called the People's Defense Units. And it's also democratic. They elect their leaders. They, every night they discuss the decisions and critique them and can remove them. And so it's all very much an experiment in democracy. And you'd think this is like, great. Well, as soon as they meet a real army, let's see what happens. Well, they always win. I mean, they've been completely defeating ISIS systematically on the ground, and at the moment they're marching on the ISIS capital.
So this is, we've all got each other's back. That's the vibe, yeah?
Yeah.
That's the idea. And sorry, you said they're marching on...
Raqqa. America is in the ironic position of having to back a bunch of anarchists because they're the only people who are good military fighters in the region who are actually trying to take out the fascists.
I thought it was quite strange on my way here. I thought I might be asking David about project management. But
Yeah.
given your work on bureaucracy and bullshit jobs, but in a way, these people are kind of exemplifying good project management, are they not?
Oh, yeah, they're doing. Yeah, I mean, people misunderstand. They think that people who are against that anarchists are against all forms of anything that even looks like a bureaucracy, any form of administration, any form of management, any form of organization even. This is, I mean, I'm sure there are some individuals like that, but, as Malatesta used to point out, if you say that anarchists are crazy people who are just against everything, all people who are crazy people who are just against everything will start to call themselves anarchists. That doesn't actually mean much about what the other ones, who are always calling themselves anarchists, will say. In that sense, anarchism isn't against organization. It means people don't have to be compelled to organize themselves.
Sure.
In fact, they believe in organization more than anybody else.
Okay, because actually, the thing that I was wondering was, what are your bits of your tidbits on your tips on project management?
Oh, I see. Yes. Well, I think that accountability is key. If you have a system where anybody can say what they want, you'll have to come up and nobody can be compelled to do something that's obviously stupid. You're going to have to make it a commonsensical. For example, consensus process. Everybody talks about it as if it's a complex set of rules, like Robert's Rules of Order, and they say it's oppressive. But they're doing it wrong. The idea is that nobody should be forced to do something that they violently object to. If you don't have the means to do so, whatever you do will be consensus, because you're going to have to listen to what everybody thinks, and you're going to have to come around to a position that nobody finds violently objectionable, which is basically all consensus is.
But what happens when people say we don't have enough time to listen to everyone?
Well, then it depends on the situation. If something has to be done, then it is okay to say, all right, for the next 3 hours, she's in charge. There's nothing wrong with that if everybody agrees to it. Or you improvise. But the consensus is like the default mode. And all I believe in is taking that basic principle that if you can't force people to do things that they don't want to do or they think is absolutely wrong or idiotic, then you're going to have to develop a structure of hearing people out. That's the only thing I wouldn't compromise on. Everything else is like, what's the most effective way to do that? For example, in Kurdistan, they actually came up with a very interesting creative solution to this. They say that they make a distinction between technical matters and moral or political matters. So they say if it's a technical thing, you can do a majority vote. Are we going to meet at 4 or are we going to meet at 5? Then sure. Show of hands. If it's like, should we be violent or non-violent? Well, then you have to have consensus.
Okay.
And then, of course, obviously the question is who gets to decide what's a moral question and what's the technical one. So somebody might say, well, the question of 4 or 5 bears on disabled people, and that's a moral question. And so that becomes a little bit of a political football. There's always things to debate and points of tension. But nonetheless, you can be efficient when you have to, but you're efficient with the things that efficiency is more important than what is at stake.
Okay. I once asked you about bureaucracy in activist circles.
Yeah.
Had you ever seen it? And you told me that you could possibly talk about that forever, but if you could just...
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm talking about now. People who don't understand that these are a set of principles around which one can improvise and find the thing which is best for a particular group of people and a particular thing they're trying to do will tend to act like everything is a set of rules that you have to obey. And it's so frustrating to me. I often have people within Occupy who are convinced that I was the guy demanding that, like, there's a rule book of consensus, because I'm for consensus. I mean, I'm not for absolute consensus. Modified consensus, there always has to be something to do. There's always be one or two people who are crazy or unreasonable or something. So, you know, everything within reason, including reasonableness. But but nonetheless, you know, there'll be some people thinking I'm the rule book guy and other people saying I'm the crazy anarchist rip up all the rules guy, which maybe that shows I'm hitting the right point in the middle. But, you know, yes, there is a tendency for creeping bureaucratization to set in, and there's various reasons for that. I've actually, one of the things I was interested in looking at in the book is why that happens. Language is a great example of this. You know, first, on the one hand, languages are always changing. There's no language on Earth that's the same as it was 100 years ago. Why is that? Well, people like to play around. Everybody's always, you know, like doing it a little different or having fun with it a little. And, you know, gradually, you know, things, you know, it doesn't matter if you're in Sweden or New Guinea or Ecuador or any place else. So people like to have fun. They'll play around with the language. But on the other hand, if you tell people they're doing it wrong, they'll believe you. So if you take a rule book, you know, for how language was in 1910 and say, look, you've corrupted the language. They'll say, oh my God, you're right. You know, teach us how to speak right. You know, they'll all use slang and slack off and, you know, come up with funny new ways of talking. And then they'll believe you if you say that they shouldn't be doing that. And in a way, this is the fundamental dilemma that makes bureaucracy possible.
So you mean, for example, language is something which happens to have rules. And if somebody comes in and says there's
But the rules are changing all the time.
Right. Do you think that we just like being dominated?
I don't know if that's it. I mean, some people obviously do. Sometimes it's laziness. They just don't want to have the responsibility of having to decide things all the time. You know, one of the reasons we like being dominated is because that way we can blame somebody else if something goes wrong. There's a certain, you know, heavy weight of responsibility when I constantly have to be, you know, part of the person making the decision. You know, I mean, you know, in a way, the aspects of power that are pleasurable are, you know, balanced by the aspects of power which are scary. And some people definitely like it's worth the risk, you know, and enjoy the pleasurable parts a lot more than they're scared by the scary parts. And other people are the other way, you know. And that's one thing that allows power to emerge. I mean, I feel very strongly, by the way, that, like, you know, compulsory participation in direct democracy is just as wrong as not allowing people to, you know, participate. In any example of successful long-term democracy I know, some people don't show up, you know. There's usually actually a core of maybe about a third of the people, like in a kibbutz or something like that, who just, like, they're the process junkies, they're the political guys, and, you know, but they're acting in the knowledge that if they do something people don't like, those people will show up at the next meeting, whether, you know, no matter how lazy they've been up till now. So, in a way, they have to, like, you know, bear everybody else's interests in mind because they don't have the right to represent them.